All right, so as the title is this morning, a simple yes or no should do. A simple yes or no should do. I want to confess that this one is a bit personal. In fact, I mentioned this to Elliot the other day. I think this is a message. All my messages are from me. I write them ultimately from God. But this is a message that I wrote that is to me. And what I've decided to do is let you all hear it. I'm going to do this publicly, but I'm speaking this one to me. I say that because one of my greatest weaknesses as a leader and just as a person and really as a Christian is a tendency to overcommit and underdeliver. And that's the opposite of really what we want. We want to underpromise. We don't want to promise more than we can deliver. We really want to over-deliver. If you run a business, or really there's so many aspects of personal life that this can apply to, we want to be people that mean what we say and say what we mean. A simple yes or a simple no should do. For example, being on time should be a big deal. Ed, okay, I'm speaking to myself here. Should be a big deal. I love to meet people. You know, maybe there's some people in your life that you know if you meet with them, if they say, hey, we're going to meet at 9 o'clock, you know they're going to be early. Those people are great to be around. I like to be around those people because they push me. They make me better, and I need to be better. One of the biggest pet peeves that I had of my dad growing up, Dad, maybe you're watching this with Bubby here this morning. Bubby's my grandmother. Keep my grandmother in your prayers, by the way. I'm going to go visit her tomorrow. She's not doing great right now, so keep her and my dad in your prayers. But one of my biggest pet peeves was that Dad just always seemed to be late. Dad, son, didn't grow up living with my dad, though. So it wasn't that I learned it from him. But then, as I grew up, I realized I might be a little bit more like my dad, and that might be a pet peeve that other people have with me. Man, for some reason, at times, I just struggle. I struggle to be late, and essentially, it's stealing someone else's time. If I say I'm going to be there, it's like stealing time. Another example is saying yes too easily. God has given limits, and I learned this initially, I think, through Pete Scazzaro and his Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, that have you ever thought that limits in your life are a gift from God, and we often find God. We experience God in the limits of our lives. They're often a blessing in disguise. Limits remind us that we are not God, and they are often the places, again, that we find Him most present. We just can't get it all done, right? We can't get everything done. We don't have all of the gifts. We can't be available for everyone. None of us have unlimited resources. Speaking of unlimited resources, did you see the post? Dan Snyder's house is for sale for $49 million. If it sells for anything near that, it'll be the most expensive real estate sale of a home in Montgomery County history. $49 million. It's a pretty impressive place, as you can imagine. He bought the first plot, I think, for like $6 million, and then he bought the 5 adjacent properties over the years. And it's just this massive compound. So he's got not unlimited resources, but even for Dan Snyder, thank God the limits are reminding him that there's a God and he's not it. And brothers and sisters, we're going to have a new owner in like the next month. Whew, it's exciting. Sorry, I got a little overboard. It's Super Bowl Sunday. I got my jersey on this morning. Back to the message. There are many God-given limitations in our lives, which ultimately force us to say yes, and they force us to say no. And at times, when we're not careful with our priorities, we either say yes to the wrong things or too many things, and we say no to the wrong things, or we don't say no enough. So let's practice that. Say yes. Okay? And it's a little bit harder, maybe for some of us, this is a harder one for me, but no. And it doesn't have to be like, no. Right? Do you hear that? Like, no. Like the audible, the grunt that husbands are good at. Honey says something. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm the only one that responds like that. But when we're saying no to someone, it doesn't have to be like, no. Oh, no, I'm really sorry. I can't. And sometimes we have to disappoint someone to do the right thing or the better thing, or better than better is best, right? So this can be translated as struggling to mean what we say and say what we mean. It's something I've been working on for many years, and more importantly, something that God is changing in my life. He's been speaking to me through this passage of Scripture that we're going to dive into here this morning, and I hope and I pray that He will speak to you as well. I'm probably not alone. Some of you might also struggle with over-promising and under-delivering, or you just struggle at times to mean what you say and say what you mean. Parents, if you're a parent, you know exactly what I'm saying. If you're a grandparent, no isn't in your vocabulary probably. If you're a kid, right? We got a few kids in here this morning. You have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm sure. If there's something that's tested in most family contexts, it's our ability to say yes and no to the right things, or our struggle to say yes or no to the right thing. So for James, it was in the context of wealth and developing patience in the midst of pain, two of the world's most difficult contexts of life, right? Wealth and all that wealth would do to a person, and painful situations that require perseverance. It's not so hard to say yes or no when times are easy and comfortable, but when we're being tested and stressed, when we're at the end of our ropes, that's when it's hardest, and yet that's also when it counts the most, and it's most important to make sure that we're saying no to the things that we need to say no to. So with that said, may our time digging into the Scriptures this morning encourage and equip us all to live a Jesus-centered way of life, being people who say what they mean and mean what they say. So lean in and let's listen to what God has to say. James 5:12. James says this: above all, above everything, most importantly, literally, that's kind of what it means, but that's probably not what James was saying. He's not saying above anything else in the world. He's probably using this word or this little Greek phrase here to kind of bring some summary to the to the book. It's like he's saying, finally, brothers and sisters, finally, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no. It's like I got the title of the sermon just from the Scripture, right? A simple yes or no will do. That's exactly what James says. Otherwise, listen to what he says. Otherwise, you will be condemned. NIV, probably not a great translation. Really, otherwise you might fall into judgment. Literally, it's a little bit more something like you're going to fall into judgment if you say yes to the wrong things and no to the wrong things. So believe it or not, swearing is a big deal. It's a big deal. In fact, swearing is evidence of impatience. Think about all of the contexts in which people swear. Maybe you did it on the way to church this morning. I'm driving the big Twinkie, the big orange delivery truck out here. And when you're driving, now I don't have to drive very far. It's like 2 miles. So it's like a 4-mile round trip. I usually don't have much trouble with the truck. But most people around vehicles like that don't like driving around vehicles like that. You know what I'm saying? So, there are probably more people that are swearing at me than I am swearing at them when I'm driving in the truck. But, when you're going from 2 lanes into one, and that person that's from some other place that doesn't know how to do it right, and they're like not sure. Like, you don't necessarily want to be merging with someone from New York, although that can be better if you're not in a hurry because they'll just go, right? But then the person who just can barely see over the steering wheel, or for whatever reason they're a little hesitant, they're not sure if they want to go or hold back. They're not really sure. They don't merge very well. And you're just, and I get so impatient with that person. Maybe it's just me. And I often swear, don't get, it's not even a word. It's just a swear, it's just out of my heart or whatever. Now, that's not exactly what James is talking about, but listen to this quote from commentator Tasker, who says this, quote, what James means is that of all the manifestations of impatience in times of stress and affliction, which we all face, the most frequent is the taking of the Lord's name in vain by the use of explosive utterances and hasty and irreverent oaths, unquote. We'll unpack a little bit what that means, but it's just not persevering, which doesn't prevail. Right, last week, perseverance is what prevails. Perseverance in commuting, even. If you don't persevere with peace in your commute, it's going to take days off of your life because of stress, right? Some of y'all know what that, and I'm blessed. I used to commute every day, and I swear to you, see, I swear. I didn't mean that, but I'm, with all my oath, I just swore every day that I thought when I leave, okay, see, honey, I'm going to the office, I'll be back tonight. I was either going to kill somebody or someone was going to kill me on my way to work or on my way home. Did anybody feel like that when just commuting? It's just stressful. And if you don't handle that well, it can really have an effect on your life. And it's probably had an effect on all of our lives to some degree. And so the response to that, we wouldn't think about it as, we wouldn't come home and say to our husband or wife or friend or pastor or whatever, man, on my way to work or on my way home, I was swearing the whole way, because maybe you weren't literally, whatever that, but the attitude of your heart is just swearing all over the place. If only, or maybe you did this, God, if you'll just part the ways, I'll ... Yeah, just make all the lights green, God. If you'll just make all the lights green, then that's guilty. If you'll just allow me to come into work, all these oaths that we're making, essentially. James says, don't do that. When we become impatient and lose self-control, we tend to say things that are better left unspoken. Some people let those things out more easily. I certainly do. Some bottle them up. Either way, swearing in our hearts is just as sinful as swearing out loud. At times, it's abusing the Lord's name, which is so common in our culture, right? We hear it all the time. And as James said, appealing to heaven or earth or whatever as confirmation that we are speaking the truth. So we might say, as children, we might say something like, well, on my mother's grave, I'll be here at 5 o'clock, I'll show up. Or, on my grandmother's tombstone, I'm going to bring you $5 tomorrow if you just lend me that $5 today. Or we make that deal with God. Okay, God, I know I didn't do X, Y, Z, but if you'll just X, Y, Z today, then I'll do X, Y, Z tomorrow. Worth noting is the fact that God is the one whose words always accomplish his purpose. Ours often don't. Again, I think the overarching theme here is meaning what we say and saying what we mean. And all of us struggle to do that. Some are much better. Some have a better and stronger foundation from their childhood, from their parents, from their lineage, whatever. Matter of fact, I was telling my boys yesterday, I dropped them off at the gym, and then I went over to Starbucks. It's over in Gaithersburg. And I pulled up, and I was on the phone with my father, with my dad. And so I'm on the phone with my dad in the car, and I back up, and I'm just sitting there. I got the car on because he's on the car audio, so I didn't want to turn the car off. I didn't know if that would hang up. I don't know what would happen. So I just leave the car on, I'm talking. And backing up right next to me, this car with tinted windows, and the music is just boom, 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 just super loud, And I could hear and I'm not against hip-hop, it's not a genre thing, but I could hear the words in the song, and it was just all kinds of cursing and all this stuff, and just terrible, and I'm like, oh my goodness. And my window was down a little bit. So I'm like, oh, geez, so I roll the windows up, and I'm sitting there. Then I'm off the phone. That whoever was in there was kind of sitting in there for a minute. And then I turn my car off. I'm about to get out, and I notice that the two younger moms get out of this car, and in the back seat are their children that are 2 and 4. And I just thought, my gosh, I felt so bad for those children. Who God only knows what's actually happening. God only knows what those mothers are saying. I don't know, but I heard the music that they were listening to, which no child should hear those words. This is like a 2 and 4-year-old. And I just thought, what kind of life are these kids going to go? What kind of culture are they already stuck in? In a culture where for many of us, we don't know what it's like for our word to be our bond, to say what we mean and mean what we say. And I'm remembering phrases even from the music, and I'm just like, man, if that's what you're all about, if those kids are growing up thinking that's what it means, to say what we mean or whatever, it's evil. But not God. So contrast, maybe however you grew up, or untrustworthy people in your lives, contrast that to what God says. His words always accomplish his purpose. In Isaiah 55, we read this: "As the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater, it provides. So," verse 11, "so is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I does achieve the purpose for which I sent it." Can you imagine, brothers and sisters, having a testimony with other people that was like that? Like, when you speak, the hearer knows that you're telling the truth, for one. And if you make a promise, if you say yes to something, you're going to do it. Or if you say no, it means no. God is always like that. His yes is always yes. And his no is always no. God is the model communicator, the one who is always consistent, always says what he means, and means what he says. Now, we can't do justice to James 5:12 without going back to the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. So let's add some, it's kind of like, it's not quite this extreme, but it's almost like James is black and white, and the Sermon on the Mount is the color in this case. Sometimes it's the opposite, but Jesus really adds a lot. Matthew chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount, starting in verse 33. "Again, you have heard," and he's doing this kind. "You have heard the law say this, but here's how I'm raising the bar. You have heard that it was said to people long ago, 'Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made.' But I tell you," Jesus isn't going to make it easier, is he? He's not going to make it softer. He's not going to lower the bar. He's going to raise the bar. "But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King," and that is Jesus. Let's be clear. Now listen to this. "Do not swear by your head." This is for me. I told you this sermon's for me. "Do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black." People would generally have dark hair in that culture, right? And so God is, I think ultimately his point there is, God is the one who is ultimately in control of aging. If I didn't trust that, I'd be bitter maybe because I lost my hair, early on. And I made a decision early on that I was not going to do the comb over, whatever. I'm shaving it. I resisted for a long time, and here it is. Take it or leave it, right? God is the one. Don't swear by your head. I mean, that seems weird to us, but they would do those things. Listen to verse 37. "All you need," this is simple, "all you need to say is simply yes or no." But Jesus pushes beyond. James says, "Lest you fall into judgment." Jesus says, anything beyond this comes from the evil one. To which I'm like, okay, Ed, whenever you say you're going to do something and you don't do it, you're not just acting a fool. You're acting like the capital F fool. You're following your late father, Satan. He's not my father anymore. He's my late father. That's a bad way to say it. My former father? I don't know. Anyway, he's not my father anymore. But we don't like to describe ourselves or other people as following Satan. Not unless you're on the Grammys. I don't know. Then it's more popular to do it that way. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't look it up. But anyway, Jesus was focused here on integrity. Having integrity, being a person of your word, in which case just a simple yes or a simple no should do. Oaths are therefore unnecessary. It's not necessary. I don't need to make an oath. whether to heaven or hell or my head or the throne or the temple or anything. I don't need to make an oath in any way. I just simply am saying yes or no. I'm being a person of integrity. In both James and from Jesus and Matthew, they are referring to the more casual use of oaths in informal conversations, making promises that can't be kept. The opposite of having our word be our bond. Robertson adds this, commentator Robertson, quote, "The Jews were wont to split hairs in their use of profanity, and by avoiding God's name, imagined that they were not really guilty of this sin." In fact, in the Hebrew Bible, it would be like G space D. So you wouldn't read God. So I'm avoiding that sin. But really, they weren't, because they were then just making these other oaths that God did not like. Back to the quote. Quote, "Just as professing Christians today use pious oaths which violate the prohibition of Jesus," unquote. Pious oaths might include the legalism in many circles that make one day holier than the other, for example. Having a service that has to be at 11 o'clock, for example, or it has to be at a certain time or a certain place, or the service has to look a certain way, or we have to do a certain thing, or whatever it might be. That if you don't do it like this, you are a lesser kind of Christian, because us pious Christians have made this deeper level commitment. Maybe it's eating or not eating certain foods, being too strict on things that God has not emphasized in His Word, and not strict enough on the weightier things. Like allowing our words to mean what they say and say what they mean. Like loving that person that most people aren't loving. Like being a little bit more sacrificial. Like leaning in with a little bit more mercy to someone who doesn't necessarily deserve mercy. Man, I don't know what social media or where you get your news or whatever. Quite frankly, I've been off of so much of it. Like in the month of January, I just pulled off, and it's been nice, I'd kind of stay out of it, and I try to kind of check the headlines to some degree. Most of what I am interested in is the local stuff. So I try to follow like Gaithersburg, MCPS stuff. I just want to know what's going on in the neighborhood. And, I don't know if you've been following the trends of what Christians are known for. But right now, I don't think, we're not in great favor, because a lot of Christians have made it their duty to speak out about certain things, or to say, one thing that's interesting to me are like these supposed Christian leaders, and it just seems like everything they say is against some other Christian leaders. Like, I don't have time for that, man. Like, I'm no big shot at anybody, but my life is too busy. I don't have time to be digging into all that. Like, how about put your social media down and walk next door and get to know somebody? That's so frustrating to me. There are more important things than getting caught up with some controversies that I'm not going to be standing before God and answer for those. I'm going to stand before God, and, there's going to be a lot of questions. I'm going to be accountable for a lot of things. But, at the end of the day, like, did I love my neighbors myself? Like my neighbor who literally I walk next to. In fact, I had such a great conversation. Just a quick side note. The other night I got home. It was kind of late. It was after men's group. So I don't know what time. It was like around 10 o'clock or before 10, 9:45. Anyway, whatever time it was. It's kind of late, right? Like it's dark. I get out of my house. I get out of my car, and my neighbor is getting out of his car. And we just end up having this conversation. We stand there for like 20 minutes. And I long for 20-minute conversations with my neighbors. And it wasn't like a deep thing. My neighbor, they're from Ethiopia, and they're very devout Muslims. And so it gives us an opportunity to talk about things like prayer. We talk about how we're praying for our kids and so on and so forth. There's a really interesting situation there. And he just seemed to want to talk about how this is a season where our kids are his kids are about the same age, and they're starting to kind of leave the nest. They're older, is a couple years older than Elijah. Just a great opportunity. I could have just ran, I kind of wanted to just get in and, whatever, but just take the time. I'm not trying to use myself as the greatest example of that. God is working on me and teaching me, but it's probably more important for me to be a little slower, in less of a hurry, and just listen to a neighbor more often. I mean, that's not checking a box. I didn't have that on my task list, but it's probably more important, right? It's probably more important before God. Listen to Hodge's comment here, which really is convicting to me. He said, quote, James's wisdom amounts to this. We should never need to use an oath to prove that this time I really mean it. Instead, we should always really mean it, unquote. I love that. Mean what you say, Ed. Say what you mean. And then one last quote from Minton, short one. Quote, our mere word should be as utterly trustworthy as a signed document, legally correct and complete, unquote. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to stand before God and be accountable as a steward of my words. If I said I was going to be there and I wasn't there, I'm going to be accountable before God. That's nice that you say, well, it's no big deal, Ed, that's fine. You know, man, I'm working on it. I just want you to know, to all of you who I text you, you know, Karen, you know, sometimes I'm on my way, Karen, I'll be there in 5 minutes. 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late, you know. Oh, no problem, okay, I'll be there. Okay, that's really nice and gracious of you, but I'm going to be accountable for that time that I just stole from you. So I'm trying to be accountable out loud, publicly. I'm preaching this to myself, so hopefully it benefits some of you. So this should be a given, shouldn't it? The people of God should be known to be trustworthy people who do what they say. I hope that we will be. I hope when we say the kinds of things that we say, and I think we really do mean that we want to bless the school. We want to bless our neighbors. We want to be known as a church who blesses the community and is generous in the community, but not just when it's convenient. And so I'm trying to just be willing to be a little bit more uncomfortable this year as God calls us in, you know, a little bit more over the side of the boat and onto the water where it's very uncomfortable and the waves kind of rage. And then I'm a little bit more aware of the storm, and I'm a little bit aware of the fact that I can't really walk on water, but somehow if I have my eyes on Jesus and I'm trusting Him, He gives me this crazy experience to be able to walk on water. That should be the normal Christian life, the experience, the kind of experience where we see God doing things that are not explainable otherwise, right? That's what supernatural, that's what spiritual gift, when we're exercising our spiritual gifts. We were talking about this a little bit after service last week, and we are just saying how, man, when we're in our spiritual gift, it should be something that we could say, man, look at what God was doing. And we're very careful to say, look where the glory should be, not to me or someone, but to God, because He uses even us. Wow. Remember the root problem that James was addressing here in chapter 5, which so often characterizes the rich, but can affect all of us. Having an attitude of impatience that rejects what God says and rejects His authority in our lives, especially as it pertains to the future. So listen again as we close to this verse with a focus on the last part. James 5:12 again, one more time. Above all, finally, brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no. Would you like to go out to lunch today? A couple of us are going out to lunch. It's yes or no. I'm very excited. Tomorrow, Ephraim begins driving school. Again, just accountability. Let me just throw this out here to the church. It's difficult for us to go out for lunch, okay, just as a family of 5 or 6. And so, I don't know, it's going to take Ephraim 2 weeks, then he'll have to do the driving portion. So let's say in 2 or 3 months, he'll be done, and then he can take our children home, and Laura and I will be available, not every Sunday, but a little bit more regularly to have lunches. So let me invite myself to your lunch gatherings, and maybe I'll invite you too. So, you know, hold me to that, right? I'm saying, let my yes be yes. Hopefully I'll be more available in the months to come. Otherwise, James says, you will be condemned or fall into judgment. So let's end by focusing on this just for a moment. James did not mean that in that moment of sin, God would strike us down in judgment and condemn us. That is not what he meant. Breaking a promise, over-promising, and under-delivering won't keep us out of heaven, okay? It's not what James meant by any means. But every time we are guilty, it's like a reward lost. It's an opportunity lost, and it causes a weakness in our spiritual armor. Rather than being strengthened by integrity, which is what James and Jesus were emphasizing. We are stewards who are called to be faithful and generous with all that we have. So may faithfulness and generosity be the central marks of our lives, and may our word truly be our bond. It is better not to promise, to say no and disappoint someone, than to make a promise and not fulfill it. So please forgive me. I apologize for the times that I probably made a promise that I wasn't able to keep. I feel like I tend to overpromise at times and underdeliver, so may God help me and all of us to be people of our word. Elliot is going to lead us in two more songs. Two more songs of response, Elliot? Okay. It might be one. If it's one and you see Elliot run out that door, just pray for him as he goes, but not to distract us. Both songs here, both of these songs, and Elliot and I didn't talk about this. He didn't even know I was going to say this, but both of these songs that Elliot prayerfully selected go really well with this message. I want you to use this time to consider what God has been saying, and just feel free. You don't have to do this out loud. No one has to know, but just to confess your shortcomings before God about what he may be speaking to you about. Confession is such a powerful tool that God uses to shape us, and we're going to see James talk explicitly about confession in the last part of James chapter 5. We'll be getting into that next week. Let me pray, and then we're going to respond to what God is saying to us. Again, I think just take a deep breath with me. Heavenly Father, we come before you now just a bit torn, I think. We're grateful to hear your word, but at times it hurts and it's convicting and it's hard for us to accept our failures and our limitations. And yet you continue to welcome us with open arms. You have grace and mercy enough for us in our very time of need, which right now, God, we have some needs. We need you to meet with us. We need you to grant us grace and mercy so that we can be more like your Son, Jesus. You are always ready to restore us and even to use our shortcomings to shape us to be more like Jesus, and that is what we want. We confess our need for you this morning, our need for your touch, a special measure of grace for some of us, and a bit more of your mercy. Give us courage, even in these moments and as we move into this week, to respond to what you're saying and to be people who say yes to your will and no to everything else. Give us the wisdom we need to know the difference. Thank you for hearing our prayers and promising to answer according to your will. In Jesus' name, amen.